Hello again, good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Minds on Guard, where we are learning how to guard our minds against all of the manipulations that exist in this world, those that would seek to manipulate our thoughts, to influence and control our behaviors, and to direct our lives towards ways of living that we may not necessarily choose for ourselves. In this video, I want to talk a little bit about some really deeply concerning and yet surprisingly common, even popular ways of thinking that we see in today's world. I would suspect that this topic is not something you would have ever considered yourself to be a supporter of, yet it's very likely that it has become an integral component to your worldview and thought processes. I know that it was a shock to me when I learned and discovered that I had areas in my thinking that would be considered to be in support of eugenics. Yes, I know it sounds horrible and terribly barbaric, yet that is the truth. I have lived with this pervasive underlying idea that was shared by the Nazis and Mao and the horrific regimes that existed in the 20th century. The thing is, what I was misidentifying as an outlook that could be thought of as sort of a progressive or geared towards progress and improvement through various technological innovations and advancement, it actually shares quite cruel philosophical frameworks that can be attached to the most brutal of social and ethnic cleansing programs that have existed in humanity. The fact of the matter is that I just flat out refused to see the connections, and instead chose to reframe my thinking through an altruistic lens, and I know that I have not been alone in that, not by a long shot. There are many reasons for this subtle adjustment in my thinking, one of which is due to the psychological and social programming of my schooling and my immersion in culture through various media platforms, like music and movies and TV and all of that. All of this has had an influence on the way I live my day-to-day life and the thinking processes that I undergo whenever I'm engaging with the world. They've led to this really troubling dilemma that I have, and I want to talk a little bit about that tonight. We touched on this topic just briefly in the last video that was made, but for a quick recap, eugenics is a set of beliefs and practices which aim to improve the genetic quality of the human population. This idea's origins are actually quite ancient, as humanity has always been trying to improve on the designs that we have been given. There is a biblical connection that is able to be made all the way back, if we stretch all the way back to the Garden of Eden, where the first choice to go against the will of God could be seen as having a type of eugenics working on Adam and Eve. That, of course, is not the only thing that's present in that fateful choice, that story that has led to where we are today, and I'll discuss what I mean there shortly. But many times throughout the ancient stories, we see humans attempting to elevate themselves above their current predicament or status within creation. One major question to ask is, why do we do this? What drives our desire to improve on what we already are? What kinds of things have been targets of the most prominent eugenicists throughout human history, and what were their solutions to the perceived problems they were addressing? Also, what kind of morality, if any, are we dealing with when it comes to the application and actualization of the eugenics framework of improving the genetic quality of humans? Have you ever wanted to be better than you are? I don't just mean like a better friend or a better spouse, but like physically, physiologically, genetically better. This is a common desire for many people, given all of the ways that we can fall short of what is sold to us as good in the culture these days. The toxicity of the hyper-comparative competition of social media is tailor-made to prey on the insecurities of people, especially young people, and then program our minds to wish that we were something other than we are. Perfection is the goal, and it's always changing in order to cajole and coerce a new crop of minds into giving up their self-worth and understanding of their inherent value. This leads to a long and terrible road where we lose touch with what makes us human and are in real grave danger of falling prey to the evil of devaluing whole groups of people in order to elevate a perceived idea of perfection. While these ideas, the ones I just referenced, are hedging toward the darker side of how and why a eugenics framework still operates in today's world, there also is, on the flip side, where technology is constantly innovating to provide us methods of addressing all of the various maladies, illness, and disease that have such destructive effects on so many lives. Things like healing the blind through microchip implants, or reactivating dead nerves to allow for spinal cord rejuvenation, thus allowing a person to be able to walk again. Being able to edit genes in the womb to be certain that a child will be born healthy and free from congenital defects like heart problems or any type of malformed brain issues that could cause real problems. These are all potentially great things and could be viewed as a type of eugenics, and actually there's precedent in history for that kind of thinking in the eugenics movement. It's referred to, and I do believe this is an appropriate term, as positive eugenics, whereas the attempts to weed out what is seen as imperfect would be seen as negative eugenics. But the positive is understood that as it's an area where the same philosophical framework is seeking to improve upon humanity in ways that truly do benefit society. But then again, that's exactly the same thing that Hitler thought he was doing when he was rounding up all of the undesirables in order to bring in the perfect race. Something that causes me great sadness is when I see people forsake their value and identity in order to pursue things that present in the world as valuable, particularly in the here and now, but ultimately fade and dissolve once put to the test of truth and the eternal nature of reality. What we see is a rampant and cancerous melding of materialism, arrogance, and narcissism, exacerbated and spurred on by the programmers and social engineers who want nothing more than to seize control of every mind and heart in the world, thus subduing them to their dominating will. This world that they are crafting is one that is devoid of love, absent of compassion and care for one another, and ultimately is evil. But, as social engineers, they understand how and why we think the way that we do, and they prey on any fear, insecurity, and imperfection in order to keep us blind to our true inherent value. It is in and through this blindness that they introduce their ideas of eugenics, their eugenicist motives, and convince us that we should hate ourselves. They get us to think this way, that we should hate ourselves for what we are, and then view ourselves as less than, thus striving to augment what is already ordained to be good, or, worse yet, seek out ways to cast others aside as imperfect, improper, and unworthy of value. In this hatred of ourselves and others, we wind up hating the one who made us this way. And in that, we fall, just like Adam and Eve, into placing ourselves above the true and perfect God. And then what are we left with? The worldview operating here in what I've just described is really quite horrific, and it's one that truly does lead to the bleakest of ends for us all, if it were followed to its logical conclusions. The rampant nihilism of the world today is something deeply troubling, and I think it opens up pathways towards even more domination and control over our thoughts and minds. The reason is, if we believe in nothing, and thus hold nothing as sacred regarding what exists beyond what we can measure, we will fall for anything that serves our desire to escape this fact that if all of reality comes from and ends in nothing, then we truly are alone and hopeless in this world. This is the logical end of nihilism, and it leads to despair, destruction, and ultimately no purpose or meaning for living and continuing on in reality. This is a terrifyingly depressing and bleak way to live one's life. Ultimately, there are two trajectories to pursue in life with respect to one's worldview. That of the nihilist, where all comes from and ends in nothing, or the one which accepts God for his truth and his real, actual, truthful escape from the nothingness of nihilistic thinking. I bring the dichotomy of trajectories to light here because the kind of materialistic thinking that plagues anyone who is stuck in the nihilism I'm describing is the exact same thing working in the eugenicist. The question to ask is, who decides what is the ideal in those frameworks? If it's you and your fear of being imperfect and having imperfection exist in the world, then the results will lead to disaster and destruction. Only God is perfect, and only He can cut through that cyclical pursuit that humans set upon to place themselves in some delusional ideal. However, if we yield and submit that fear of hopelessness and will to dominate in favor of the truth that all forms of life are valuable in and of themselves simply by being, we may grow into a truly better way to improve the state that we're in today. We may learn to love, we may learn to serve others and to cast off the selfishness of seeking perfection. We may learn to accept the trials of life in humility and be a blessing to those who are struggling as they see the example of our submission and perseverance. This video is a warning to be on guard against the designs of men who seek to improve upon the will of God. We must be diligent against those that would use the gifts of human ingenuity and spirit in order to elevate themselves and not fall into their subtle traps. We can and should pursue growth and health, yet we must be on the lookout for the things which seek to devalue life and pull us away from the truth that only through Christ may we truly live as we desire. In Him we have hope and life eternally, for He frees us from the shackles of sin, death, and destruction. Thank you for joining me this evening. I'll leave you with this. Please stay safe, please look after your loved ones, and please stay diligent and vigilant with your minds on guard.